As big business and industry began its rise to prominence in America during the early 20th century, so too did the issue of pollution. As social outcry over the mistreatment of our country's environment increased, it became evident to the federal government that something needed to be done. In 1948, the Federal Water Pollution Control Act was passed. The FWPCA allocated funds for the federal government to provide loans for the construction of wastewater treatment plants across the country. The act also provided funds for use by local and state governments to investigate pollutant sources. However, the FWPCA did not give the federal government enough enforcement power and little progress was made. In 1972, the FWPCA was amended and became formally known as the Clean Water Act. The new law encompassed interstate as well as in-state waters, thereby making all surface waters in the U.S. subject to the Clean Water Act. The EPA could now regulate pollutant discharges into all surface waters, as well as design and implement pollution control programs across the country. The CWA greatly increased the amount of regulation big businesses could be subjected to by setting clear industry-wide wastewater standards. The new act also provided significantly more funding for the construction of water treatment plants across the country and made it unlawful for any person to discharge a pollutant from a point source into navigable waters unless permitted to do so by the EPA. As EPA Administrator Douglas M. Cossell stated in a press release after the passing of the Clean Water Act, quote, "The time has passed when our rivers and streams are the dumping place of unwanted chemicals, and this new act leaves little room for dischargers to avoid their obligation to protect public health."
In the late 1980s, John Rapanos, a wealthy real estate developer, filled 22 acres of wetland that he owned in Midland, Michigan, with sand as preparation for the construction of a new mall. The Michigan Department of Environmental Quality stated that the Clean Water Act protected the wetlands and that filling them in was illegal. Their view of the situation was that the wetlands were adjacent to navigable waters, which are considered waters of the United States. When Rapanos filled in the wetlands, they produced discharge into the navigable waters adjacent to them. This violated the Clean Water Act's provisions according to the Michigan Department of Environmental Quality, as Rapanos did not obtain a permit before filling in the wetlands, which produced the discharge. The Environmental Protection Agency also warned Rapanos about filling in the wetlands. After Rapanos ignored the EPA's warnings, the EPA brought a civil suit against him. The EPA cited the Army Corps of Engineers regulation that states navigable waters are protected under the Clean Water Act. The controversy was over what the term navigable waters meant. The EPA firmly believed that the waters that the wetlands drained into were considered navigable and protected by the Clean Water Act.
In his defense, John Rapanos argued that the property was not a wetland and that he was not breaking any laws. He claimed that his land was up to 20 miles from any navigable waterway, and therefore could not be considered adjacent nor connected to any key body of water. At the time, all bodies of water with a continuous surface connection to a navigable waterway was covered under the Clean Water Act. Evidence showing such a connection from the wetlands to any such key waterway was vulnerable to scrutiny. Rapanos also argued that the Clean Water Act did not specify the ranges and distance for ruling two bodies of water as being adjacent.
Upon hearing Rapanos versus the United States, the court was split in a rare but not unheard of 4-1-4 vote. This meant that 4 justices were of an opinion ruling in Rapanos' favor, 1 concurred that also ruled in Rapanos' favor, and 4 were of a dissenting opinion, meaning they ruled against Rapanos. Justice Scalia wrote the plurality opinion and was joined by Chief Justice Roberts, Justice Thomas, and Justice Alito. The plurality believed that the phrase "waters of the United States" was being interpreted too broadly by the Army Corps of Engineers, and that the phrase can only be interpreted as referring to permanent, standing bodies of water. The plurality also denied the argument that only waters that are actually navigable can be protected under the Clean Water Act. However, the plurality also ruled that a hydrological connection is not sufficient in order to warrant protection under the Clean Water Act. Therefore, in this case, the fact that the wetlands were merely adjacent to a navigable body of water did not mean that they were able to be granted protection under the Clean Water Act. In the words of the plurality, a continuous surface connection with the aforementioned water of the United States is required for a non-navigable water to be covered under the Clean Water Act. Finally, they defined a continuous surface connection as meaning an area that is difficult to define where the water begins and the wetland ends.
Justice Kennedy had the final deciding vote in this case. He voted that neither side presented enough evidence to fully present a ruling. He believed that the wetlands did not have a continuous surface connection to any flowing body of water, similar to the plurality, but he believed that a significant nexus between bodies was enough to establish a connection. Kennedy believed Rapinos did not provide any evidence that the wetlands did not have a significant outlet, nor did the EPA prove that the wetlands did outlet to a flowing body. Kennedy's decision was to send the case back to a lower court where new evidence could be presented. Rapinos and the EPA decided to settle out of court. Rapinos had to pay a $150,000 fine and cease construction on the 54 acres in question during the case, and 134 additional acres of wetland that he owned. In return, Rapinos did not have to admit any wrongdoing. In response to this ruling, the EPA developed the Clean Water Rule to clearly define what waterways could be protected under the CWA. This rule stated that if a significant nexus or a continuous water surface connection could be established, then the waterway is protected by the Clean Water Act.